We're now officially being recorded. Yes, so this is just a conversational panel. We're not really presenting a lot of information. It's a conversation with a lot of kind of ideas, big vision, and place-based kind of knowledge around good fire and grazing. Please feel free to add questions at any time, and the panelists and us, we're all hoping to address them as you ask those questions. So you can also, we do have questions that we want to talk about, but we are happy to have your questions guide the way we discuss these kind of concepts and how they work together. So you're here today. We're going to talk about grazing and good fire. We're talking about bringing agriculture and grazing back to urban centers and back to different areas to do treatment and also to bring good fire back on the landscape. And a way forward for communities to be empowered with their own tools to create fire resilient landscapes and potentially mini food systems. Our panelists here, which are going to introduce themselves in a moment, will discuss models of landscape stewardship that utilize both good fire and grazing. We will highlight what has worked, talk about what hasn't, and discuss potential sustainable models that address the need for ongoing landscape level stewardship. That's kind of the big vision of this panel. There's a lot to discuss, and we look forward to having your questions. We will also highlight how critical timing is to get the desired outcome and dig into how each ecosystem is unique and that this is truly place-based work. So I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves. Why don't we start with you, Sarah Jo, first, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Jo McDowell. I am a project manager at the Butte County Fire Safe Council. I'm also a local contract grazer in the Oroville area. But my house, I just bought a little house in Paradise, California. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sarah Jo. Brian, can you introduce yourself? And yeah.
Hey, all. I'm Brian Peterson. I work for All Hands Ecology, Fire Forward program. I'm the fire ecologist there.
Thanks,
That's a
Brian.
Marine. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and we're going to go a little deeper dive in the next question. Devii, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Devii Rao, and I work for the University of California Cooperative Extension as a livestock and natural resources advisor, and I cover Sonoma and Marin counties.
Thank you. And Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Biaggi. I'm the manager of TomKat Ranch, which is based in Pescadero, which is in San Mateo County on the coast. And we also manage ranches stretching through Monterey, San Benito, and down into Tulare County.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to our first question, guys. And I'm going to let you guys jump in and discuss this at will. So thank you for your introductions. We're going to deep dive a little bit more into your work. In the next question, please describe your experience with grazing and or good fire. Some of you may have more work on one or the other or are deeply embedded in doing both, and how you've witnessed them working together. And go ahead and highlight a success story. Jump in, whoever wants. If no, go ahead and jump in.
I can go.
Right.
So while I am the livestock and natural resources advisor in Sonoma and Marin counties, I've only been here for about a year. And prior to that, I was in San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Cruz counties. And down there, I was involved in a little bit of grazing, a little bit of fire, mostly grazing. Um, But we were able to get some funding down there to develop a prescribed burn association for those three counties. And that really kind of got the ball rolling on educating the community about prescribed fire and how it can be used for a variety of benefits and kind of training up the community so it becomes a tool, a practical tool that can be used for many conservation and fuels reduction benefits. And I know Brian can talk way more about that than I can. I also worked on a project at Pinnacles National Park looking at grazing, not so much for fuels reduction, but for conservation values. And although fire fuels reduction wasn't necessarily one of the park's like stated objectives, they absolutely recognize the value of using grazing for fuels reduction as well. And one example I wanted to share of fire and grazing being used together is again back at Pinnacles National Park before I worked down there. There's this area called the Bottomlands. It's a big flat area at the entrance to the park. And when the park acquired that area, it was heavily infested with yellow star thistle. And they really wanted to do integrated pest management approach for controlling yellow star thistle. And so they did a lot of background research and they came up with a plan that has been quite effective. So I actually just found a short PowerPoint presentation online that laid out some of the timelines. So I have some timeline here to share with you. So in June 2009, they did a prescribed burn to flush the yellow star thistle seeds that was in the soil seed bank. And so the following year, they got like really heavy production of yellow star thistle. They followed that up with a broadcast herbicide application in April 2010. And then in July 2010, they brought in some goats for goat grazing to kind of eat down what was remaining. And then since that time, they've done some spot spraying and hand removal of yellow star thistle. So that's not necessarily specifically for, again, for fire fuels reduction, but it's an example where those two strategies, fire and grazing, can be used to achieve a particular goal for fuels reduction, or sorry, for for conservation.
For conservation. Thank you, Davey. Because yeah, the two can be combined not just for fire fuel mitigation, but for ecological transition, which is another big piece that we can look at. Anybody else want to jump in on your experience about grazing and a success story?
I'll go next. We've at TomKat, we've had a vegetation management plan, basically a prescribed burn plan. It's a 10-year plan since 2021. And in the last 5 years, we've been able to put fire on the ground, 3 of those 5. But that has been a total of 4 fires. It's been very effective for removing old vegetation, but more positively, I think, is where we see our opening it's a fire is a great disturbance mechanism, and we see in some pastures really opening it up to native perennials coming back. The best example we have right now has been our last burn in 2024, and that was the one that we actually put goats and cows in sooner than the other fires. Literally burned in October and had cows on the ground as early as November. We were through there repeatedly. A month ago, I was out there touring it, and the perennial grasses that had come up last year have only expanded even further. So part of it is the tool of fire. Part of it is if we weren't here with our domestic livestock, there would have been wildlife following into. They always want to come in behind a fire because of all the minerals released and the forage is so good. And so going in there and then moving out, and then our human timeline, allowing these plants to go to seed before we graze them, the desirable ones, and targeting the non-desirable ones. So being really intentional about how we use the grazing and what kind of plants as we apply these animals. And if I could add one other, I was thinking about that just crossed my mind. This was not a prescribed burn, but it's where a very effective burn was in the early 2000s. I was working in Mendocino County. There was some serious fires up there. We had some good. I was working for a forest company, and we had a burn in June, and it was a cool burn because it had been rainy. And this burn was slow enough you could walk through the burn. There wasn't enough of us to put out. We burned, I'm going to tell you, around 20,000 acres before we were done. It was unbelievable, the quality of regrowth on trees, the deer that then showed up back in the forest where they generally are not, and all the other critters that work off that ecosystem when it's functioning. And so it was a really good example of when nature actually applied a burn at a really good, let's say, temperature and conditions, where we could probably do that in a prescribed burn.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Mark. I love it. And you've got the conversation started a little bit on the critical piece of timing, which we'll dive in a little bit more. But Sarah Jo, go ahead.
Oh, sure. My experience with grazing, I think, was the first part of the
Yeah,
conversation.
describe your experience with grazing and or good fire and one or the other or how they work together, and then a success story about how you've utilized one or the other to any sort of success. It can be in any form. Community related is a great success story, Sarah Jo.
Yes, it is. I got started in grazing. I grew up in South Dakota in the Black Hills, and so large ruminants were, a large part of our ecosystem back home. And my mom actually bordered this 30,000 acre buffalo ranch. And I watched this woman who was the main person, owner operator of the ranch. She took some savory classes and learned how to do holistic grazing and management. And she started moving the buffalo in a more rhythm of what their natural patterns would have been, on doing targeted grazing that's disturbance and rest. And I literally watched the land come back. And these perennial grasses that we're talking about just a minute ago is the same type of thing. And then the successional species of animals coming back to graze that land too. So it not only restored our fauna, but the flora as well. It was this beautiful way of showcasing what just the movement of animals in their natural way could do to restoring land and regenerating that land again. So that's kind of what got me interested in grazing. And then I moved to an area outside of Oroville called Berry Creek in Butte County. And I'm sure most people know our county is with Paradise. I live and work out of Paradise, California, and our devastating Camp Fire. But also we have some other major wildfires that have gone through our county in the last 7 to 8 years. The Bear Fire, North Complex Fire was one of them, burning over 500,000 acres. And I bought a little 40-acre plot after the fire and quickly realized I was way over my head with how to manage it, how to manage in a post-fire ecosystem way. What do I do with this brush coming back and all these invasive species that are just flourishing now after the fire? And I decided I was going to get some goats. And that kind of started my journey of grazing and many failures and grazing. But also that's the community part, is then you start meeting people that are willing to share knowledge and kind of hold your hand. And I found some amazing people to help me learn how to graze properly, the right way, how to do animal husbandry. And I started bringing that work back to Paradise and to the Butte County Fire Safe Council and building our grazing program. One of the, I would like to say, probably my favorite success story, and the reason why I'm in Nevada City today, is there's this landowner. It was my very first contract grazing job. And she had 3 acres and she really wanted some goats. She called this area that she didn't know how to manage the haunted forest, because it was so thick and overgrown with poison oak and brush and broom and just downed material. I mean, it was so dense and thick you could not see through it. And she just thought, maybe if we could get the goats in there, just open it up, and then we could, do the next set of whatever the treatment would be. But they didn't even know what to do other than, like, how do we even see what's in there? So I brought in my little herd of goats, and that's exactly what they did. They opened it up. They lifted up the canopy where you could see the dead and down material. And that was in April of 2024. And the goats did a great job of just doing that. And through that, I was actually able to graze multiple parcels around her, because people kept seeing what we were doing and thinking, oh yeah, I need that too, and I need that too. So it started this beautiful little community movement of these goats throughout this neighborhood. But in July of 2024, we were hit with the Thompson fire, and it came through fast, and the winds changed and started heading right towards the direction where this couple lives in Oroville. And it was a moment where I thought we were going to lose my herd and possibly this whole neighborhood that I had just been in and fell in love with. And the fire actually, from this area that we grazed, and she had done some mastication work, a spot fire came and hit that area, and then it laid down and it stopped. And it actually, I would say, saved not only their home, but also a lot of the homes, because it was on a slope, a very steep slope. So Linda, this woman, that she knew that area was a high risk area. By doing that work and looking for ways to strategically get that fuel out of there, it was 300 feet from their house that the fire just stopped and laid down. So there's a wildfire example, but that following year, all that dead and down material that the goats exposed, we went in with our prescribed burn association and Butte County, and with 40 volunteers, we cut up all that material and put it in burn piles. and did this beautiful lunch and connection community little involvement with it, and neighbors came out and joined in, and we got rid of all that material. And the result is now this beautiful land that has been restored back to an oak woodland in more of a historical looking setting, which it should be. And now they have goats and sheep of their own, and now they've started this community grazing cooperative, and with the help of Sarah Kaiser, and and it goes on and on and on. But it's now they are moving these animals. All the places that I had done contract grazing, they have their own little herd, and now they're moving strategically through this neighborhood and sharing these animals. So I feel like it's probably one of my proudest moments and most humbling moments as a contract grazer, and just as a person to be able to support these landowners in this way.
Thank you for the beautiful story, Sarah Jo. I just want to highlight that was one of the second community grazing cooperative in Butte County, and Sarah Jo is going to build out more because now these communities have their own. A FLIRT, if you guys don't know, is a mix of sheep and goats in their own way. They're empowered in their own way to manage their fuel reduction, and some of them even create a micro food system with their herd. It depends upon how they evolve with their herd. I'm going to hand it over to Brian. Brian, your experience, probably mostly with Good Fire, and a success story. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that story, Sarah. That's yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, my experience is with fire almost predominantly. I've worked with grazers. Devii I've got to hang out with over the years. I'm lucky enough to have. But yeah, I had never really done grazing myself, so I'm coming from that fire perspective. That said, there's numerous examples of I can say of using fire to control Medusa head or star thistle. And there's multiple success stories, one of which maybe Mitsui Ranch on top of Sonoma Mountain, working with Jeff Wilcox over the years, and we'll burn out his Medusa head and he'll go back and plant perennial grasses and kind of working together on that. That's all pretty cool. And I don't want to jump the gun here, Sarah, if this is one of your questions, but I will say that with some of those successes, I kind of put with the fire and the weeds, that's a little bit of you're targeting one specific plant. There's an art to it, right? But it's pretty straightforward, all said and done. But where I'm really interested in kind of busting into on top of that weed management work is kind of, I think Mark brought this to light a little bit, like grazing, when you bring the grazers back in, to not only get rid of weeds, but to promote our native plants. And so I'm excited to do more of that. And the big grand points I've been thinking as all these folks are talking is I will say this, I haven't had a lot of success in that because I haven't been able to try, because I feel the last 8 years we've been working really hard just to make it so that we can have capacity to do good fire on the landscape. And so too, I've watched the prescribed grazing community also building their own capacity. And there's a few little touch points right now where we're starting to be able to get enough of a commitment on one piece of land with commitment and grazers and bringing that fire that we can actually learn what our best techniques are locally with our different, California is bonkers as far as different ecosystems. So what works in Southern California doesn't necessarily work where we're at. So all of that to say, and I think that, Sarah, this is where we might dig into a little harder, but I think that building the capacity of these communities is absolutely crucial. And to expect us to know how to do all this perfectly before we build these communities and capacity is wrongheaded. We have to build that capacity first, and then we'll responsibly mess around and learn, together. So anyways, that's been a gap, I would say, for us. And I'm seeing that change a little bit, and I'm super excited. So I think just for me, being a fire person, just hanging out with grazers is a success into itself to start with. All in there.
Thank you, Brian. I love all that. And we're going to hopefully have time to dig into a lot of that stuff that you talked about. And I think it's great that we now have the fire people and the grazers coming together and really bringing their own ecosystem knowledge. And especially when we're looking at transitioning seed banks, kind of like what Mark said, sometimes you have fire and grazing, or Davies, like sometimes fire and grazing, they need to be working together to get that transition in a real way, or we're going to do it a lot more quickly. And we need to bring both of those pieces of knowledge. So that's pretty cool. We're going to dig into that a little bit more, but the next couple of questions are fairly grazing specific, and it's from our conversation that we had. Sarah, Joe, and Mark, we talked a little bit about this together, and pre-panel was describe the grazing of different grazing species, the benefit of multi-species grazing. All of our grazers can talk about that. Brian, feel free to jump in and tell us what you think about it too. I mean, so like we want to talk about that. And then after that, or if you want to loop it in now, we're also going to kind of discuss the calendar of palatability, because we need to talk about like, it's not just the impact, it's the timing, especially when we're looking at plant evolution. So go ahead and jump in and discuss that as you'd like.
Well, maybe I'll jump in here. Having, I won't say I've run all the domestic livestock, but quite a few of them, including a lot of poultry and hogs, and really understanding what the outcome that you want and what these animals do naturally and syncing those up. So to completely step away from fire for a second, thinking about hogs. Um, I have actually been able to utilize them to open up ground, and we think about them rooting deep. And when you don't want them to, put them on ground where these are pasture-run hogs, where it is dried out, the clay's dried out so hard they can't do much more than create a seed bed. But if you continue to feed them, generally with pasture-raised hogs, I'm moving them while they're still grass, but leaving them long enough to actually take out the undesirable plants and create a seed bed and move on. It was amazing to find out what was hiding in that seed bed that really wanted to be able to grow, that the plants we didn't want were choking them out. Again, it's around timing. It was on clay. If I'd done that during the wet, I would have created cement. Those hogs would have just compacted that. So flipping that over to fire, it's understanding, at least in my way of thinking, it's understanding of, if you're looking for browse, mainly browse, then it's probably goats. And do you have the grass to match, or do you need to feed hay? If you just want a general light touch grazer, I would think about sheep. If you want a big, more of a broadacre grazer and some trample, then cattle. And in that, how much do you concentrate them? And one of the things, one of the staff at TomKat who had been on fires in Colorado on big acres where they had pastures in between, or they had pastures where fire was in between, and what they noticed was just trailing between the pastures, how much grass came back up where the cows had actually tracked across the burned land, because seed doesn't germinate when it isn't with soil contact. And so that was one of the things we realized, was getting the cows onto, even with hay, getting the cows out there on the burn as soon as we could before the first rains. We're burning in the fall in October, get them out there. Yes, did we get a little more germination where we fed hay? Absolutely, because there was seed left over. But we also saw some really interesting regrowth right in the cow tracks on incredibly steep hills. So anyway, I'll turn that over to whoever wants to take it from here.
Thank you, Mark. I love that. That was great. Davey or Sarah Joe, do you guys want to jump in?
Sure, I can jump in. So in terms of multi-species grazing, I don't have much experience with that. I've mostly worked with cattle producers, and it's just cattle. That's pretty predominant in a lot of the Central Coast, and up here as well. So I just want to share a brief story. I was out on a ranch maybe about a month or so ago, and this rancher was driving me all around, showing me all the work he's done and his projects. And shrub encroachment is a big concern for this rancher, and it's a big concern across a lot of Sonoma and Marin and kind of south along the coast. And some of the reasons for that, why it's an issue for ranchers is, cattle are not going to be grazing the shrubs. It's mostly coyote brush, but other shrubs as well. And so as the coyote brush moves in, it kind of reduces the amount of pasture, the amount of grasses and wildflowers, forbs available to cattle. And not only that, the more and more the brush builds up, it becomes more and more of a fire issue. So this rancher was showing me all the different spots where he's done control for coyote brush, mostly using herbicide. And he's been pretty successful. But he's found that definitely, and you see this all the time, you try to control coyote brush and it is a tenacious plant and it will come back. And, maybe it takes 5, 7, 10 or more years to come back, but it'll come back most of the time, unless I guess you pull it out by its roots. But so I was asking him, have you ever thought about bringing in some goats? You've done all this shrub control, but as you've said, they come back. So have you thought about bringing goats in? And he thought I was suggesting like hiring contract grazers, and he was like, "Well, I can't afford goats. Like, I can't afford to do that." And I was thinking, "Well, no, I mean, on your landscape, that I think would be impossible. But have you ever considered, buying your own goats and kind of having cattle and goats together?" And his response was pretty interesting. And it was like, "Well, with cattle operations, you can have stalker operations where you have, young cattle, you bring them in, you graze them for a season, and then you sell them." And he said, if you could do something like that with goats, I would consider it, but I can't just have like a year-round, goat operation on my property, and I'm not going to become a contract grazer. So that was kind of an interesting response where it just kind of brought up one of the challenges to more traditional livestock cattle operation to bring in that multi-species.
Thank you, Davey. I really like that because when we're considering grazing a good fire, a lot of times when we talk about grazing, we're talking about timing and what animals to use because you're paying somebody to provide a grazing service. But we also need to highlight, how do our producers get those same things and keep their forage for their livestock, and how do we make that accessible and maybe even another income stream from raising these goats in some way. Sarah Jo, do you want to jump in or have any thoughts on multi-species grazing, or we can go on to some kind of other questions? Or you, Brian.
Yeah. I'll just jump in quick. I mean, what we're at the Fire Safe Council, I mean, we're all about fuel reduction, bringing our landscapes back into a healthy ecosystem again. And, we do pre-fire grazing and we do post-fire grazing. And what I love about the goats and the sheep is there's areas that are so thick that the cultural sites, they open up this area so we can actually see before we put heavy machinery in to do, more of that heavier lift of getting some fuel out. So they open up that space to be able to see. So we can actually observe what is best next. They're light on the land. They don't walk into the water, they don't go into the waterways and compact the soil. We don't have to worry about erosion with these small ruminants. I love them because we have a very hot and dry climate in Butte County, and our goats actually do very well in this climate. So I love to say we have no red flag days with these animals, because there's a lot of days in the summers where we're shut down, and it's, our work really with machines, and you can only do it so many days of the year with between the rain and then the hot days. Like, we get these little windows to really get in to do that heavy lift of fuel reduction. So being able to use the animals in this way has really, I've seen the benefit on small scale and on a very large scale throughout our county, both pre-fire and post-fire. So the multi-species grazing, I work mostly always with sheep and goats, but I love the idea of putting cattle in where they should be too.
Thank you. Yeah. Species specific. I mean, understanding what species go where. We had one question in the chat talking about how much do people charge for contract grazing services? And I would say that we can talk about that a little bit. It is a great way for some people. We do have some ranchers certain in our area who are ranchers and producers, but also are contract grazers. In Sonoma, Napa, around here, these counties, the price per acre is pretty high. Most people are charging between 1,000 to 2,000 an acre for contract grazing, which means you're bringing everything, the fencing, you're reaching goals. Often when you're doing contract grazing, you're pushing your animals a little bit. Like, so if you do have production animals, you can have weight loss. So considering what the goals of the people are and what to charge. Sarah Joe, if you want to jump in and see what your prices are. Mark, do you know the prices down by you or even Southern California? We can just give regional different prices on contract grazing. That'd be great. Go ahead, Sarah.
Butte County is very different. We're yeah, economically much lower than the coast area. So our typically for 10 acres plus, we're looking at $500 to $600 for an acre. Anywhere under that, 10 acre under is more like $700 to $800 an acre. Is what we've been seeing for prices in Butte County.
Sarah, I don't have any prices from down here, but I would agree with Sarah. It's the smaller acreage always costs more. People forget the mobilization cost that comes into that. And I think one of the biggest things, if you're a small acre owner, is who in your neighborhood will team up with you. Because if you're moving the animals in, it does, as long as you can walk the animals to the next property, if it's if they're contiguous, then you start dropping those. That mobilization cost is a big cost. Um, I do want to point out one thing. Devii was talking about the rancher that was uh, the cost of the cost of using goats to get rid of brush. One thing we have noticed using goats is the at least, and we don't have science to back it up yet, but and we're working on that. But the regeneration of the grasses under the coyote brush with goats is pretty phenomenal. One of the things you do is you do leave shade, even if it's a skeleton. And most time with coyote brush, you can't kill the bloody thing anyway. It's going to have some top to it. It also turns out to be a wick if you're on the coast with the fogs or even in the rain. So you get these small micro green circles of grass around the coyote brush that you see bigger under fir trees and oak trees. If you have a lot of this, and the other thing to think about is as you're grazing with the goats, everything those goats are eating, I think about with cows, 80% what goes in the front end comes out the back. So you're creating, well, I don't know what the percentage with the goat is, but you're creating a lot of fuel to feed the soil biology. And when you feed that soil biology, you will create grass that will eventually come back to your cows. So it's really about what and how you're going to invest in your land. We've done masticating, mowing. We're actually trying out a brush crusher, which in some places is cheap and been very positive. No, there is no one tool, I believe. Nothing's a silver bullet. You've really got to look at the context, not just of your ranch, but the actual particular site you're on to understand what applies. But I would encourage people to look at goats or even sheep. Some sheep, they don't graze as high, browse as high as goats, but they do. Once they have a taste for a coyote brush, they can make them look like mini palm trees because they can only reach up about 2.5 feet. But it's amazing the grass they create and then how they manage it because they start down low and the saplings are, I don't know what you would call them in a coyote brush, but the first generation plants really can get hammered by them. Oh.
Thanks, Mark. And again, I think what keeps circling back here is the place-based, that, it's going to be different depending upon where you live, how you do this. Um, and and also, Mark, what you said about, yes, contract grazing, one of the biggest expense is the transport. So if communities want to do it or a landowner wants to do it, get all your neighbors to do it and start thinking about these treatments being landscape level, neighborhood level, community level, and then it's more beneficial and cheaper for everyone. The other thing, Davey, that comes to mind with a cattle rancher is I wonder if a cattle rancher would ever be willing to align with one of our contract goat people who need a place to put their goats in the winter, which is when we can maybe find coyote brush more palatable and they would have a place to keep the goats eating the coyote brush. And you could find kind of a beneficial relationship there because a lot of our contract grazers are actually homeless, landless. So they don't have a place to put them. So there's something like sometimes we can find relationships that works. And you have to build a little trust first, but it might work for everybody, and that might be helpful.
That's very interesting. Let's talk more later.
Okay, sounds good.
If I could throw in a quick note on that, I know we're going to talk about calendar palatability, but you're really hitting it because when we brought our goats in, we did not, unlike contract grazers, we didn't force them to eat. So we said, we're going to observe what you're going to eat for the next 2 years. We're going to move you around the ranch. We're going to manage. We're going to balance your gut with grass and brush. If there's not enough grass, we'll feed you some hay, but we're really going to try to stick to the grass. And it was watching when, and I was amazed at their first year, and these goats came out of Wyoming, so they did not know coyote brush. It was a novel plant to them. And when they turned on to it, it was the old growth coyote brush. And
Hmm.
the first year wasn't the leaves, it was actually the bark. And now it's been interesting to see this. And you're right, the winter, they seem to be, it's much more of a preferred plant. So there's really some opportunities to align these animals with this calendar palatability and possibly cattle ranching.
And I feel like I just have to point out that coyote brush is a native plant, and a lot of the grasses on our California grasslands are non-native. So it's an interesting kind of back and forth between, well, but coyote brush is native, but well, we're losing our grasslands really quickly compared to other ecosystems. So if we want to, and I think this might be getting into a later question, but I just kind of from the ecological side of things, I wanted to point out that coyote brush is native. There's absolutely a place for coyote brush in our ecosystems. It's a really important plant. And I think the interesting question to struggle with is what is the appropriate mosaic of grasses versus shrubs, depending on where you are and what your goals are for the property.
Thank you, Davey, for defending the coyote brush. She gets a lot of abuse and a lot of hostility, and we love our coyote brush people. We love her. She's a great pollinator, but she is I say she, but it is an incredibly successful plant, man. And that's the burden is she likes impact. So getting her appropriate impact, so you actually have a healthier plant, and you're not eliminating her. You're just providing the appropriate impact and making sure it's not a monoculture of coyote brush because that's not healthy for the coyote brush or the landscapes or anything. But thank you. We never ever want to bash our native plants. They just need the right treatments. So I feel like I want to hear from Brian. So Brian, I'm going to bring up a question that, and maybe it's a dual question that I'd love to hear from you. So being that this is a calf, with a lot of hopefully farmers on here listening to this, I'd love to talk about what advice would you give landowners or farmers who are interested in getting grazing or good fire on their landscapes? There's a lot of farm industry in which they have wild spaces or forests that maybe need treatment. They are affected by smoke or other things. So how could we tell them how to get them on there? And since I know this is a big thing we're going to discuss, what are some of the hurdles of getting these treatments on our landscapes? Funding, regulations, community concerns, and like how could they get it and how do they address those concerns or at least understand the concerns that they're going to step into when they start to utilize these treatments? Was that enough questions, Brian, for you?
Yeah, I mean that is kind of the big question. I mean, even hearing you all talk about the multi-species grazing or just grazing in general and what I've seen, I don't want to be uh negative, and that's not the point, but there is a hurdle with the system of a private landowner hiring some people to have a one and done treatment, right? And that is fundamentally going to be a challenge for us as we talk through all of these issues today and for, all of our lives forever. So just to say that, that's the big picture thing. I think some of the hurdles is ability, right? To especially when it comes to fire, there's a lot of permitting. There's a lot of well, not a lot of permitting, but there is some permitting, and then there's liability and all these things. So that is going to be a challenge. I know for us, this is part of our goal as a nonprofit, getting funding from various private family foundations and stuff like that, and Cal Fire and such, is that we're trying to create a place, a way for people to bring fire back to their own lands, right? And I think that's going to take some time, though. I mean, realistically, um, I will say this is, yeah, so there's different things, if you want to do a burn in July in your forest, that's going to be a pretty heavy lift, right? It's a great thing to do, I think, I'm pushing for that. But you're going to have to probably engage a more professionalized workforce for that. Although people can still be involved, but as far as the planning and making sure we have all the right equipment. But I will
Brian,
also say,
could you just describe a little bit more why that is? Like what the difference between that or a different fire, like why one take more hurdles than another?
Yeah, well, I mean, when it's warmer out and hotter out, California, dry climate, we have to just have a few more tools and be a little more diligent about broadcast burning in that environment, maybe, and that's part of the permitting process, right? Is we do fire modeling and all this stuff to determine how much resources we need for a certain burn under certain conditions, and that might be 4 fire engines and 25 staff or 30 staff or something like that. So that can get pretty intensive. That's like in the what we call summer preparedness when it's a little hotter, and that's basically risk of fire jumping the line and still continuing to move, keeping the fire contained. But as we do, there's other kinds of burning we can do in the winter season, depending on the species we're targeting, where the containment issues are not a concern because it's surrounded like gorse. I think up in Marin and Sonoma County is a good example. You can burn gorse in the middle of winter. In fact, that's a great time to burn it, and it's surrounded by green grass. So all of a sudden, those containment issues go way down. So a landowner could just learn a few things and be able to do that, and the permitting's a lot less intense. Or doing some burn piles on your land during the winter, especially. So I think that's some of the hurdles to think of, but you don't have to have that big, heavy, intensive summer burn, especially right off the bat, right? Like you can work in these smaller burn piles and or little patch burns that are in cooler times. You can't get all you can't kill Medusa head with that kind of burn, but you can do other good beneficial things. So I think the big learning is going to be a hurdle. Some permitting is going to be a hurdle, and then on the hotter burn seasons, having enough staff and getting enough people out, and that's where the PBAs really come in handy. Kind of some expertise helping people get fire in their land. Any more to say to that, Sarah? I don't
Yeah.
want to. I can ramble on until my eyes
I
bleed.
have another question in the chat that I'll bring up to you before we hand off these questions to everybody else. But I also want to say that we live in a world of acronyms. A PBA is a
Oh, I'm
Prescribed Burn
sorry.
Association for those who don't know. Many people may know. But I do have one question that I would thought since Brian, you're here and you're our fire guy is one of the questions in the chat was what have we or can we learn from native fire traditions, especially since prescribed burns are part of their tradition and something they've historically been barred from doing? What efforts have been made to include Native communities and nations of California in fire management, grazing, and burns alike? I mean, if you want to respond to that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's an essential and really important question. It's also slightly complicated. We're talking about all of California, so various efforts in various places. And in a lot of places in California, Native communities are leading the way with bringing fire back to the land, and in some cases, some grazing as well. So it's a little bit hard to answer that like really specifically because it's going to be unique also to different tribes and their locations and what efforts and how they burn. So I think, yeah, I don't know how much I can say around that, but I can say that there has been a lot of effort with prescribed fire communities that are non-Indigenous to work with Indigenous folks, and at the same time, not always enough effort, right? And not always the right effort. So I think that is an ongoing issue, and it needs to be regardless of where you are and how much involvement Native communities have in the local like good fire. It's a question and something that needs to be at the fore of I think every PBA and everyone doing fire work on the land. And I know that's
Thank
maybe
you,
not a
Brian.
super satisfying answer, but that's the one I've got.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, sadly, that's a lot of this panel is like, again, this goes back to its place specific. Like depending upon different places are going to have different relationships with tribes and different engagement with the tribes. And so it's really that, again, we go back to that. It has to be place specific, and building relationships is one of the things with tribal members, with your neighbors, with everybody that's going to help us manage these barriers.
Yeah. I always joke that it's hard sometimes when especially with landowners are looking for some answers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm an ecologist, I'm a botanist, ecology, plant person. Like, I'm going to give you some Gavin Newsom answer right now. Just feels like I'm dodging the question, but it's partly because it is so complicated and specific to everyone's property. But I do think, not to be a broken record, this is where community comes in and more touch points. And this is where, the UC, where Devii works, and all these people doing this great work, people working with nonprofits, whatever it is, this is like RCDs. This is being part of the community and finding touch points to the community is just absolutely crucial because that's where you're really going to learn, not so much in a quick price per acre type thing.
Right. And
Yeah.
I don't want to go off tangent because I have one more question for you, Brian, but I just was presenting at Sonoma State University to their ecology department about grazing, and they were asking me that same question. So how many animals go on 1 acre for how long? And it's like, depends upon what's there. It depends
Yeah.
upon the goals. I mean, it's such varied work that you can't say, here's your stock rates and you'll accomplish your goal because it depends upon if you're in a forest or a grassland. So understanding that this is a lot about getting in touch with your community and your landscape and understanding those treatments is a part of all of this work for all of us. And farmers know that. They know that landscape and are deeply embedded in it. One more question for you, Brian. You mentioned seeding with perennial grasses after burning to manage Medusa head. Can you expand a bit? What grasses were you using? Then we'll
Yeah.
Alan.
Just to be totally clear, we're managing the Medusa head to help promote the perennial grasses. I don't know that planting the perennial grasses will manage the Medusa head, just to make sure that's clear. So I believe, and so I wasn't part of the planting because that was on the landowner, the people we were working with. Again, bringing up that issue of having that long, like, being on the land over time and using many tools. But I believe he was planting, I think mostly purple needlegrass, but also maybe some California brome and some of the LMS blue wild rack, which are kind of, unfortunately, we're in a situation where those are the workhorses of grass restoration. But that's what he was planting. That's what's available. Again, one of those huge hurdles is actually having the seed to plant is incredibly expensive and hard to come by, especially
Yeah.
diversity of seed and local seed.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what he was mostly planting, and he was using a seed drill because his slopes
Uh-huh.
are mostly shallow enough in that particular ranch. You can do
Cedro. Yes, I'm going to thank you so much, Brian, for all your, and like also to say, like the question on the seeding, like Mark had said, the seed banks often in there, are native seed banks in there. So sometimes fire and then grazing to follow it creates the situation for those seeds to grow. So a lot of the times it's us tending the landscape to provide the opportunity for the native seeds that are in our seed bank. Something to think about as well.
Can I
So
add one really quick thing, Sarah?
absolutely, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I don't mean to take up too much space
No,
here,
no,
but
go ahead, go ahead.
I would say also one thing, it's true everywhere, but it seems so real in grasslands is like the history of that site.
Mhm.
Because I'll be like, oh man, like we did a burn and some grazing over here, and there's a beautiful response to the seed bank, and then I go somewhere else that seems exactly the same, and I'm like, why is this not working as well? It's all just a vena coming in or whatever, and then a wild oat, and then I talked to an old timer, and they're like, oh yeah, in '55 we scraped all the topsoil off here and put it over there, and
Yeah,
then tilled it, and then did whatever, and this is where there was actually 1,000 cows here for a year, whatever it is, like a
yeah,
feedlot, and you're just like, oh yeah, like and on a site like that, you might have to the seed bank won't exist, right? You might have
that's
to really put a lot of effort, but there are other places where it might. So really looking at what's there and trying to understand what has happened there and talking to people is really crucial, and that's a big driver of the results you're going to get. Yeah.
exactly, Brian. Exactly. Go back to talk to people, be in touch with the land, community, and place-based stuff. Because yeah, in Petaluma, there's a lot of potato farming, and where there's potato farming, there's no seed bank. Yeah. So I'll
Sorry,
bring it back.
could I add
Go ahead,
one to
Mark, of
what
course.
Brian said? We were at TomKat. We were involved in a seed plot trial with UC Davis. Took place. One was on TomKat. One was Rush Ranch over in the valley, and one was up at Sears Point. And germination rates ran from 20 something percent to 30% to 80%. It's like, well, wait a minute, what happened here? Well, when we started looking back at, yes, exactly what Brown was talking about. One place, the place was 20%, they'd stopped farming the year before. At TomKat, the farming had been stopped somewhere about 7 or 8 years. The one that had 80% had never been farmed. Now, on our place, it took about 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden, voila, these seeds, I think it was about us getting the soil health right. And then all of a sudden, the plants appeared. Why should they germinate if we don't create the correct conditions just because we put seed in the ground? And so I think that's where, again, this somebody earlier mentioned the one and done. There is no one and done in nature. Nature's going to like, hey, you kind of mess things up until you fix it. We're going to lay back here and wait because our one and done is reproduction. If we reproduce at the time or germinate at the time that our poor conditions, that's our one and done. And so I think it's on us humans to recreate the conditions for the desirable plants.
I agree. I agree. Thank you, Mark. And even after being farmed, they came back. It just took them longer. So I'll go back to the question that Brian was talking about, but also to all of you to kind of readdress what advice do you give landowners slash farmers who are interested in getting grazing or good fire on their landscapes? And what are some of the hurdles of getting these treatments on our landscapes to help them understand like funding, regulations, or community concerns? And I'll hand that over to Mark, Sarah, Joe, or Davey. Please jump in with your thoughts. Or I'll call your name out if you. There's Davey.
There you go. I think I would like to touch on the hurdle component of the question. And I feel like I'm coming at these questions from a little different angle from other folks, but as a relatively new livestock advisor up here, one of the things I'm doing is a needs assessment. So I'm like sitting down with a bunch of ranchers trying to understand like what are the issues in the community. And one of the things that I'm hearing over and over up here is like, oh, there's this parcel that's adjacent to me. It's 600 acres, and someone from the city, just came in and bought it and removed grazing. And, another person says, oh, there's this 900-acre parcel, just down the road that, Parks came in and bought and removed the grazing. And I'm hearing this repeatedly, and I'm like, how many acres of this is happening? And so I'm sort of starting to think about a new potential project to really understand how big of an issue is this? Where is this happening? And what is the land ownership? And try to come up with some kind of like education and outreach strategies for these either private landowners or agencies to help them understand what are the benefits of grazing from a fuels reduction perspective, from a biological diversity perspective, a conservation perspective. And I think probably part of the problem is just a lack of knowledge and understanding. So the big hurdle I'm having is how do I reach these folks in a way that doesn't feel like intrusive, and that feels like I'm providing them resources to do something that they may want to do. So I think one of the hurdles to getting these practices, such as grazing on the landscape, is changing ownership. And then related to that, my hurdle is how do I reach these folks? And so I just wanted to say that because I'm curious if anyone here has any ideas.
I will help you with that, Davey. It's a huge problem
Yeah.
in Sonoma and less in Marin, but it's a huge problem, and I'd love to come together with you and help support whatever you're thinking of because it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that would be great.
Really.
And people talk about like, well, one of the big issues for a property that like maybe doesn't have fencing anymore is to just get that boundary fencing. And that's something that NRCS doesn't, the Natural Resources Conservation Service doesn't fund. They'll fund internal fencing, cross fencing, but not boundary fencing. So it's like, okay, if we want to have grazing at these properties, we need that hard fencing for the external fencing. Even if we have like electric fencing or virtual fencing or whatever for the internal stuff, we need that hard fencing. So how do we find funding sources to support these boundary fencing so we can actually do grazing? So yeah, these are some of the hurdles I'm hearing.
Oh my gosh, Davey, I've been spitting that out for about 10 years now. That is so important. And we talk a lot in the farming world about land access, and we are actually watching this huge evolution of the loss of really good agricultural land, especially in our counties. So I see Brian's hands raised, but thank you for bringing that up because that's really important. And if we're talking about hurdles of getting on this landscape, but we're constantly seeing landscape being lost to agricultural community, that needs to be a big thing that we're addressing here as well. And the agrarians on these, I mean, I live in this county, so I can tell you that are doing amazing land stewardship. These are people doing really good work, and they're losing that land access and they're losing their ability to produce food. And we're getting land that's not tended and brush encroachment. I mean, it's just like a landslide of problems. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh yeah, just throwing it out there. I think it's funny how I would imagine people on this panel, probably everyone I can assume, would much rather be just seeing the best what grazing fire regimes create the most beautiful wildflowers and pollinator resources. And I think when you're doing this work, you quickly start realizing it's a people economic issue. And, we're going to have to be creative about what that looks like. We look at institutions like the RCDs and how much they help people, and how those are funded. So the model of, I think landowners need to pay their way in a lot of ways and take care of their land. That's a responsibility, but it's also difficult. So, anyways, just that's a big thing I think that we think a lot about in the fire world is how we're going to fund this, how it's going to be accessible to landowners, and how we're going to have something because I assume the grazing is the same way. It needs to, we can't be doing this just 1 year funding cycles. I've seen so many grazers be like, oh, I'm getting do this thing, I'm getting some animals, and then they economically take a hit or two and they have to stop. And we never get anywhere sustainable if these things are come in fits and they need to be we need to have like a good 20 years to build these systems. And we need funding to understand that we can do that, and build the capacity and knowledge base and systems that work. Sorry, that's the soapbox there, but
That we're
big
all
problem.
we're all up there with you, Brian. I love that soapbox, and that's true. Like without funders thinking 1 year grant funding does not allow you to create any infrastructure or any long-term stability, and it creates this chronic instability in which nothing's ever done well. And then we're blaming agrarians or land tenders for not doing it well when they can't because they don't have the funding cycle to do it. Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. So thank you for that. And I'm going to bring back Sarah, Joe, and Mark, but we did have one question, and you guys all three could probably address this, is can you talk about the best practices to balance the need for, just because you brought this up, Davey, grazing for fencing and other animal migration? Because traditionally there are a lot of fencing that allows wildlife through, but you guys can address that kind of system where cows stay in, wildlife goes through.
Yeah, and maybe Mark or Sarah Jo, you might know the specifications better than me, so feel free to jump in. But I know for boundary fencing, there's something called a lawful fence in California, and it has specific requirements to be, I think, like 48 inches high and have, I think, at least three, strands of barbed wire.
Smooth wire top and bottom, and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But there are people also use wildlife friendly fencing, and I think that is typically more on the kind of internal fencing. And I don't remember exactly what NRCS's specifications are on that, but I think it's having like a top and bottom wire with no barbs, and the spacing is a little bit different. But that's kind of what I can remember. I'm sure other folks can have more details.
I would second that, and just because of the state we live in, we tend to have a litigious personality here. You cannot skimp on your boundary fencing if there's asphalt on the other side. Um, and then there's the chance of getting, especially if you're running cattle, the chance of actually getting somebody hurt in an accident, let alone the animals getting killed. So, but internally, you definitely can do a lot of electric fence if you can do it, whether it's single wire or three wire, you almost zero restriction to wildlife migration. It will definitely not slow down elk. They'll just take it down and keep going. Um, I'm getting introduced to elk on one of the ranches where they've already built a lot of elk crossings into the barbed wire fence, and we're going to continue to build more. And once the elk understand where those are at and on their trails, they use them quite a bit. And it's actually to the advantage of the ranchers, because if the elk are using the elk crossings, which don't let the cattle through, but the elk can go over or under, there's actually less fence to damage. So it's worth investing in those fences.
Thank you, Mark. Sarah Joe, did you want to jump in anything about fencing? Or the other question about um, landowners, and maybe you want to touch into this about landowners who are interested in grazing or good fire, landowners or farmers. Like maybe you talk about the cooperative idea of like that's one way for people to get started where it's not fully on them and can be integrated into a cropping system, and then hurdles, and then if you want, and fencing. So go to it.
Yeah, I think, like Brian was saying, local RCDs, like checking out what's available. Like in our county, the Fire Safe Councils, we work closely with RCDs and different other nonprofits that are doing that good work too. So I think landowners checking to see what is available. Are there any grant funding opportunities, projects coming my way, is a good first step. But it's really going back to that community, and it's building that community, that village type mentality where we're in it together. And I think that's, for me personally, I am a grant manager and I go out and do different scales of projects of fuel reduction, but I'm always educating our landowners on what's the next step, because you can't just come in and remove a bunch of fuel. We know when a year, 2 years, that fuel is going to come right back. So it's about educating on land stewardship, maintenance options, and we might not always have a grant to come back and do maintenance. So how can we build that community level of support to continue to, this is tax dollars money. Like this, this is all of our efforts going into the projects that we're doing. So it's like supporting each other with these maintenance for this common goal of wildfire safety, is to me the way we're going to keep it going, the sustainable way. And so the community cooperative grazing, I teach a lot of classes, and there's two things that are the biggest concerns. Number one, it's I don't want to be tied down. I want to be able to travel. I want to be able to go out to dinner and not have to worry about being back at 7 o'clock to put my animals away. Or, I want to go out away for the weekend. I don't want a 24/7, job all the time with these animals. So that's always the number one concern. The second is this idea that having animals on your land will bring in predators. That's always another big topic of concern. And, so addressing those two things, but having a cooperative, people coming together, having more eyes on the animals, having a hard shelter if needed, or guardian animals, but using those animals, crossing fences, walking, like Mark was saying, one of the biggest things is the cost of fuel and the time commitment and bringing these animals in and out of the landscape. So I shake a bucket and my animals come following me to the next place where I have my fence set up. This is the way we should be moving animals if we can. And then working with our local prescribed burn association, they teach classes on how to do this safely and successfully, and building that little village mentality of helping each other with this goal. It's going to have to come down to, we need each other. We have to help each other. Grants, funding, it's expensive. All of it is, and it's not always going to be there. So let's work together. And I love the idea that Devii and Sarah were talking about of, maybe there's a local goat contract grazer that could come in and help, because one person's problem is another person's resource. A lot of times it's like, oh, I don't want animals, but I have animals over here, and boy, you've got a lot of grass over there. So can I come and graze that? And pretty soon we're, playing board games together and drinking a glass of wine. Like it's knowing each other and being willing to ask those questions and supporting each other. I think that's how we're really going to change and have it be scalable.
Awesome, Sarah Jo. Thank you so much. And I did want to highlight too that the story that Sarah Jo told in the beginning, you can watch the video on the Butte County Fire Safe Council of that community, and you can watch it on my website, wildoathollow.com. And either one of those you can go to and see that video. And it's a really great video telling in a beautiful way that community and how they were saved by the goats and Sarah and sharing and all those things. And it's funny. It's cute.
Thank you.
So just because we're coming towards the end of our panel, I'm going to throw out a big question to all of you guys. How do you envision grazing and good fire coming together for long-term sustainable land stewardship in the fire-prone regions of the West?
Can I give one quick example?
What's that?
Can I give a quick example of something I'm excited about?
Go, please. Yes.
Yeah. So we just received some grant funding from the Mitsui Foundation. But instead of saying just our property in Sonoma Mountain, this funding said you have this much funding every year to do anything on Sonoma Mountain. So make our boundaries bigger, go beyond the private property boundaries, and then where we can, have our funders think the same way. And so that we can, the reason for that is that we can be opportunistic about when we burn, where we burn. We can be prepared for a lot of different things depending on the year. If we put all our eggs in one little basket, it's going to seem like we're not successful from year to year. But if we broaden the scope and get funding that's different, sees it at a bigger scale, we'll always be successful every year because we'll always be doing cool stuff. So I don't know if that answers that question. That's a vision, different way of thinking about it. Fire safe councils, yeah, bigger communities thinking together.
I love it. And then you're approaching an ecosystem, looking at an ecosystem for treatment, not like one property and how do we treat one property. And we have to start thinking beyond property lines because fire and ecosystems don't end at a fence line. So that I think that's great. And that you have a funder willing to kind of be flexible and think about that. Like that's the push for us doing the work is to push the funders to think a little bit differently. So really impressive, Brian. And Devii, we got to think of funders helping with the fencing because there's a critical need and highlighting that. I think we can do it. We're getting closer. Mark, Sarah, Joe, Devii, you guys have any big vision of like what's your vision of doing this? Like pie in the sky.
For me, and somebody mentioned this earlier, it's actually a people problem. I think if you solve the people, the problems are solved. And so I think too often we are managing for what we don't want. And we really should be thinking about our outcomes and from a holistic perspective, try to manage for what we do. And along the way, understand that we're trying to solve something that didn't get created in a couple of years, especially with these fuel loads. I mean, even talking about having folks from the native tribes come in and help us burn. These are not the same conditions that their ancestors burned under, right? So to me, it's getting people to think about really clearly what is the outcome a community wants, whether it's fuel control, whether it's wildflowers, you name it, and what is the context they're working in, and they go understand what are the tools, be they animals, be it herbicide, be it burning diesel through some piece of machinery to actually accomplish this, and then having the patience. So it really comes down to can we educate the other 98% that don't actually make their living out of agriculture. And a lot of them own small pieces of land that have fragmented the agricultural land. So it's really about educating the people, I think, for us to have a big picture success here.
I love that. That's great, Mark. Thank you. Devii, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Brian and Mark have already said this. I think really building that community and getting the word out in any way we can. My job is to do research and education, and so that's kind of my wheelhouse. And so, developing relationships with as many ranchers, with as many agencies I can, just get that network to be as large as it can. And and it's totally outside my wheelhouse, but I wonder if, maybe we have some partner in the local community who has a budget for marketing. That's not something I'm good at. That's not something I know how to do. But I wonder if that's something that our, community could take advantage of to try to get the word out beyond who we're usually talking to. And I don't know what that looks like, but it's something I think about.
I like that. I like that, Devii, a lot because we boots on the ground. I love Mark what you said too, like working for what we want rather than what we want to get rid of, but also knowing what we're good at and what we're not good at and bringing in people that may help us in the places we're not good at, which is marketing, of course. Sarah Joe, you have a couple minutes if you want to jump in and give us your beautiful vision.
Oh, my vision, I think I kind of already started talking about it. We have 7 ridges in our county, and my vision would be to see a grazing cooperative and a prescribed burn association on each of our ridges, and like a tool library I really believe in this village mentality of helping each other. It's the only way we're gonna be able to save our landscapes and our homes and our lives. So to me, it's seeing that. And not only is grazing and fire the least expensive treatments, it's also the best for our landscapes. And so it's it's about looking at it in a long-term way. How can we maintain this land for generations, not just for the now, not just for that one-time treatment, but large 100-year plans, of this is how we restore land, is through good grazing and good fire. And I'm so tired of seeing our communities wiped out by catastrophic wildfires. We just got 8 inches of snow in Paradise, which it rarely ever snows. We haven't seen that much snow in a really long time. And it's just like the greatest blessing to think that potentially we might not have some really terrible fires this year come through. So, but through grazing and good fire, I think we have a chance of maintaining our lands and coming together. And there are 2 practices that bring people together. I swear, I take a goat out and all of a sudden people are just running to me. It's like they're magnets for they open up your heart space. They connect. They want to connect with you. They want us to connect back to the land. And I believe it's how we can do it.
Thank you, Sarah Jo. From a county that has had massive wildfires every year, I think, except for this last fire season, right? Yeah. So massive wildfires that they're still coming together in community. They're incredibly connected, and they're kind of also helping us streamline a way forward in community connected together. And so this is a reference about how us, the people who are boots on the ground, hooves on the ground, doing the work, are coming together in community and then pushing that knowledge up into our funders and our policymakers, because they don't know this, we know it. So it's our job to create the networks and the knowledge and push it up so that our funders and our policymakers can start to implement the change that we know is necessary, rather than a sort of top-down effect, because we know that doesn't work. Never has. So with that, Guido, I think we're 1 minute early, but we can hand it over to you. You're on mute if you care. The technical guy.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Guido.
I appreciate you and all the speakers. Thank you for being part of the 2026 California Solar Farm Conference. As I said, the workshop was recorded. It'll be uploaded to YouTube. We'll send you that link. And we have a couple more workshops today, so make sure to tune in, and many more in the coming days. Also, make sure to check the regional gatherings. We have 10 all over the state. So yeah, anywhere you're in California, you probably have one close to you to connect in person with your community. So yeah, with that, we're done. Thank you so much again. See you.